Alright, Misha here, and with the end of the Eaglemoss collection, we pretty much know what we're going to get. And while some ships might appear later in the special line or bonus line or XL line, I think it's pretty safe to say that we won't get any more Zindy ships from Season 3 of Enterprise. So the 7 I've laid out are what we have. And actually, only 5 are true Zindy ships. 2 others are reuses that were used by the Zindy, but appeared as other ships throughout Enterprise as well. So we have ships from the Reptilians, the Insectoids, the Primates, the Arboreals, and the Aquatics, and none from the Avians because they killed them all. Yeah, the whole concept of Zindy is a little different for Star Trek, who tends to be pretty conservative with their alien races. But at least the Zindy had the interesting thing of having 6 intelligent species either evolving or at least cohabitating the same planet for a time before they blew it up too. So I just thought we'd revisit. First off, we have the only Reptilian ship we see in the Eaglemoss. And aside from shuttles and transports, this is the only Reptilian warship we see. It has particle weapons and torpedo launchers of some stripe. It has multiple engines. We know that it has at least 7 decks. And internally is kind of geared towards a reptilian style, including having thermal chambers, chambers, including a private one for the captain. Probably has like full-sized ones for the rest of the crew. We don't know the crew. We know it's at least 22, 24, maybe more, which seems pretty few for a ship with 7 decks, but then again, the habitated part is relatively small. So, I guess that fits. We don't know exact size because on-screen evidence is kind of contradictory. Sometimes they look under 100 meters, sometimes they look over 200 meters. So most sources claim, 130 to 150 is an average, which makes perfect sense. And this is very much a warship. And all of these, at least all the big ones, can open subspace vortices, vorti, for FTL travel. Next up, we have what's actually in the collection, a Nautilus ship, as seen earlier in Enterprise, but in the Zindy arc, this is seen as an insectoid patrol ship. Specifically, we see it underwater, but we can assume that it also traveled in space. So just a model reuse. They just did some slight recoloring, but the model was unchanged. And since we saw it underwater, even the recoloring is a little suspect because of lighting potentials. We actually see more insectoid ships than pretty much in the other Zindy races. And it has the big guns, so it would have had particle cannons, may have not had torpedoes, and may or may not have been large enough to open up a subspace vortex. But nothing's known about it. It was just a background ship seen in the ocean. But since the model's in the collection, I thought, why not bring it out to flesh things out? Moving on, we get another insectoid ship. This is the most recent release. And it would appear to be the final Zindy ship we'll get in Eaglemoss. This is the Insectoid Scout. Sometimes also called the Insectoid Patrol Ship. But there seems to be another model that's also called Patrol Ship, so this we'll call the Scout. Had a small crew of just 3 and was a relatively small ship. but it was capable of opening a subspace vortex. So it's probably one of the smaller Xindi ships that could do that. And it would have had particle weapons. However, it was very easily destroyed in the episode Hatchery by a few torpedoes from Enterprise. And since the insectoids themselves are physically smaller than most other intelligent species, to them it may not seem like that small of a ship, but to the rest it's pretty small. Neat model though, very prongy, and it's one of the bigger models in the Eaglemoss Standards collection, just as the full-size warship, which we got much earlier on. Like, this is issue 172. This is issue either 24 or 28, I forget. Early on, though, within the first year, just over the first year of the series. And it is quite possibly the largest model in the standard collection. Very impressive. Not as heavy as you might think, because it does have quite a bit of polymer, but it also has a decent amount of metal too. But a lot of detailing here. I think it's in people's tops when it comes to alien ships quite often, and this model stays sold out pretty frequently because it's pretty impressive. And it has both particle weapons and torpedoes, plus it has the subspace vortex generator, and has a hatchery on board, and is decentralized, kind of like a Borg ship. There's no delineated command center, communications center, living quarters. It's done more like a hive, which is kind of interesting. And it was much larger. It had a shuttle bay that carried what Reed described as assault shuttles, so it could deploy smaller craft, meaning that it's of pretty good size. And in the series, the insectoids, and especially the reptilians, are the most opposed to humanity. Moving on, though, we get to another one that's kind of a stand-in for the Zindy. This would be the Arboreal cruiser. It was seen before in Enterprise as a relatively primitive Arconian warship. And later in Season 4 we see it as a Tellarite warship, which is what this model is of here. But again, they just reused the CGI for all three. It would seem to have some weapons sticking out, but also has what looked to be pretty primitive engines. So from the rear it looks to be a somewhat antiquated ship, although we can just say that's just more of a stylistic choice than anything else. We don't know exactly the size, but it's larger, maybe 200 to 250 meters. And again, it definitely had particle weapons, probably at that size, would also have had torpedoes. And while it was reasonably well armed, it seems like the Arboreals were more like sloths or something, sloths, and were more interested in research and science and less in combat. So while a relatively large vessel, not as combat oriented as, say, the insectoid or the reptilian ships, but it was a relatively minor ship. That's why they just did a reuse, but we do see it towards the end. And to go along with it, we have a relatively recent release in the collection. This was issue 130 something. This is the Zindy Primate ship. Kind of an interesting design. Relatively long model and quite large, but also very light, based on just how thin it is. And we basically know nothing about it aside from the usual. We do know that it has the ability to launch and retrieve shuttles and other small craft, so it has a reasonable sized bay. Rough estimates of the ship's size put it at between 100 and 150 meters, but that's very speculative. But it does fit in size-wise with the rest of the ships. And like the Arboreals, it doesn't seem to be a primary warship, although it seems to have more weapons capability than the Arboreal, so more of an explorer and defense ship, perhaps. And a very unique design, to say the least. And then our final ship, and the one that never wants to stay on its stand, the Aquatic Heavy Cruiser. This is one of 2 or 3 aquatic ships we see in the series. This is the larger ship. There is a smaller... Told you. There is a smaller cruiser that they use as well. This one is quite large, especially by the standards of the Enterprise era. Some sources have it at 1,100 meters, some have it as long as 1,800 meters, which really seems aggressive, all things considered, but who am I to say? We do know that it has a large shuttle bay, and it has an air aquarium inside for oxygen breathing entities, but since it is an aquatic, it's primarily water based, which might explain the large size, just based on how big the aquatics are compared to some others. And it was comfortably able to carry Enterprise through a subspace vortex, and Enterprise is 225 meters, so it's quite a bit bigger than that, we know for sure. It was also the most advanced of the Zindy ships, having again particle weapons and torpedoes, but more advanced defenses, targeting systems. However, it was one of the slower, more cumbersome ships, which isn't surprising considering not only is it large, it's also filled with water. So it would have a good bit of mass and inertia. Whereas something like the Reptilian Ship is known to be very nimble, very maneuverable, very agile. Just saying. And the insectoids, because of their small size, and many of these are atmospheric capable. In the series, the Arboreals and the primates are pretty quick to side with the humans, and the aquatics are kind of the holdout species, but eventually they do as well, leaving the insectoids and the reptilians to keep the war on. But even then, towards the end, the insectoids back out, meaning that it proves that the reptilians were the biggest hawks in the Xindi coalition, with the Arboreals kind of being the least aggressive. It's an interesting story, and I think quite a fun arc. It was definitely a dramatic improvement over Season 1 and even over Season 2 of Enterprise, and it was quite good. It wasn't perfect, but I'm happy that they did 5 dedicated Xindi ships in the collection, plus the 2 others that can count. I think it would have been neat, since we did get 2 insectoids, if we'd gotten the smaller aquatic cruiser, or frigate, if you will. But that's okay, I suppose. Other than that, I think it seemed that at least we got one of all the major ships. And I always like it when a ship like the Nausicaan or the Tellarite ship can kind of do double duty in the collection. Even though Enterprise definitely was the first to take full advantage of CGI, having more alien ships and even more friendly ships than any other series. Budget and time were still things, still factors, so on occasion, when it wasn't a critical front ship, they would recycle models that they already had. Again, I've covered these all before, so, and the thing is, we don't really know much about the Xindi ships. We get a little bit of info on the Reptilian, the Insectoid, and the Aquatic, but for the Primate and Arboreal, we know basically nothing. So, even years later, nothing has really come out about them aside from, hey, here's a neat new design. But they do seem to have a somewhat common design lineage. For example, all using the same FTL travel and very similar weapons. But on the other hand, they definitely all have kind of their own unique design aesthetic. Which goes to show you that while the Xindi races were partnered, were cooperating, they were also separate, so much so, and warring sometimes, so much so that they managed to destroy their own homeworld. But anywho, just having fun looking at the collection as we get to the end. The last one's issue 180, which is the board cube from First Contact, is due out in September. And after that, well, that's all she wrote. So anyway, which of these do you think is kind of the most interesting looking? The kind of spiky reptilian? Or the two insectoids? Or maybe even the primate? Or definitely the more unique aquatic? I mean, for me, it has to kind of be the insectoid, because it's just a bizarre design, and the models are physically quite large. But I like all of them for their own things. They are pretty unique. With that, I'll let you go. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe, I greatly appreciate it. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.